Hello and welcome to the viewing and listening audience to the 14th meeting of the Joint Select Committee on Social Services and Public Administration. This is the committee's first hearing with stakeholders pursuant to its examination of the state of technical and vocational education programs and their contribution to achieving the developmental goals of Trinidad and Tobago. Members of the public are invited to submit your comments or questions on the Parliament's social media platforms, YouTube channel, ParlView, or via the Parliament's Facebook or Twitter accounts. At this point, we will be having two entities before us, the Ministry of Education and the Ministry of Youth Development and National Service. The inquiry, once again, is an examination of the state of technical and vocational education programs and their contribution to achieving the developmental goals of TNT, and has the following objectives. 1, to examine the scope and quality of TVET programs available in Trinidad and Tobago. 2, to assess whether TVET programs are aligned to meeting the country's developmental goals. And 3, to evaluate the strategies and measures that are being adopted by the state to sustain and promote the enrollment of young persons in TVET programs. I'm the committee's chairman, Paul Richards. At this time, I'd like to invite the other members of the committee to introduce themselves, starting with Member Monroe.
Hi, President. Good morning to the Ministry of Youth and National Services, Ministry of Education, Member Monroe.
Member Mohit.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Pleasant good morning to you and all members of the ministries joining us here this evening. Member Mohit.
Member Sinanan.
Good morning, all members. Minister of Works and Transport, Rohan Sinanan, member. Thank you.
And Member Nakid.
Good morning to all. Hope we have a productive morning ahead of us.
Thank you all. The other members of the committee are Member Penelope Beckles, who's out of the country, Member Esmond Ford, who's also out of the country, and Member Avinash Singh, who has a conflicting engagement. Thank you once again and welcome to this inquiry. At this time, we'd like to invite the heads of our visiting entities to introduce their entities and also to deliver short opening comments, starting with Dr. Peter Smith, the Chief Education Officer, Education Ministry. Dr. Smith.
Good morning, Chair, and thank you very much. So I will move straight into the short opening remarks, opening statements. Senator Paul Richards, Chairman, members of the committee, members of the panel from the Ministry of Education, Dr. Patrice Paris, Chief Executive Officer, National Training Agency, Mr. Anil Ramnarayan, Chief Executive Officer, MIC Institute of Technology, Mr. Urban Huggins, Director of Funding and Grants Administration Division, Mrs. Ava Billy Jackman, Manager, Research at YTEP, Mr. Peter Fraser, Curriculum Coordinator, Ministry of Education, and let me say, representatives of the Ministry of Youth Development and National Service, and the viewing public, good morning. Technical and vocational education and training has evolved over the years. Recently, at an even higher rate, with the advancement of technology and the integration of new methodology in the training and education industries and the levels, heightened even further with the challenges posed by the global pandemic, COVID-19, and the advent of new competency requirements at the international level. There has been a global increase in uptake and offerings driven by demand and interest as the new pedagogy and increased relevance of these training programs have attracted a larger student base than in previous years. In Trinidad and Tobago, in the classroom setting at the secondary and lower education levels, the curriculum division serves to ensure the adherence to the Caribbean Examinations Council's regionally developed syllabi, while at the post-secondary levels, there is a collaborative effort between the National Training Agency and the Accreditation Council of Trinidad and Tobago to ensure the offerings of training providers meet industry standards and are responsive to the needs of employers and the industry. The Ministry of Education and its implementing institutions embrace the challenge in changing the perception of TVET, firstly within the education and training sector, and more so amongst the population. This has spawned and will continue to be the catalyst for several initiatives to attract new and returning participants to the education and training sector through apprenticeship programs and systems, equivalency of qualifications from a competency and outcome requirement standpoint, and continued financial support towards the fostering of growth in the industry. All this being said, there will be a need for a paradigm shift and will definitely be a long-term strategic project that will lend to success and popularization of the TVET global movement. The Ministry of Education takes this opportunity to thank the committee for its inquiry into the state of technical or vocational programs and are confident that the esteemed panel will be able to answer questions that may arise. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Dr. Smith. We move now to the opening comments from the Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Youth Development and National Service, Mr. Farouk Hussein. Mr. Hussein.
Good morning, Chair and members of the Joint Select Committee, as well as to the Chief Education Officer and representatives of the Ministry of Education. The other representatives of the Ministry of Youth Development and National Service present are Major David Benjamin, who is the Director of the Specialized Youth Service Programs, Mr. Sean Ramratan, Director of the Youth Affairs Division, and Ms. Janine Benjamin, the Project Coordinator at the Project Management Unit at the Ministry. The Ministry of Youth Development and National Service was established by the government of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago as a new ministry in August 2020 with the strategic intent of aligning critical resources to allow for concerted efforts to facilitate an enabling environment which promotes and encourages youth participation in all aspects of sustainable development. Data from the CSO estimates that there are approximately 544 persons in Trinidad and Tobago between the ages of 10 and 35, representing approximately 40% of the country's citizens. The Ministry of Youth Development and National Service, MyDNS, views young people as an asset for national development, and as such, investing in training to help youth realize their innate potential is critical to the social and economic development of our country. Thus, young people must be given the opportunity to learn skills and obtain the knowledge necessary to thrive in the modern world, characterized by a fusion of technologies that is transcending the physical, digital, and biological spheres. It is recognized that technical vocational educational training, TVET, can play a critical role in economic growth and sustainability. This type of education can improve productivity, make people employable, enhance human capital, improve creativity, and attract investment. TVET for today's economy, therefore, must provide skilled workers at all levels. The MyDNS, in keeping with Vision 2030, putting people first, as well as the National Youth Policy of Trinidad and Tobago 2020 to 2025, seeks to harness youth social and intellectual capital, affording young people opportunities for TVET in both traditional and non-traditional occupational areas. We look forward to providing additional information to the committee in its deliberation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Hussain. Mr. Hussain is the PS, Ministry of Youth Development and National Service. The way we will proceed, members have been assigned to start the round of questioning with both entities. Member Naked will start in a short while. He'll have about 7-8 minutes to start with the Ministry of Education. And then other members will be able to do follow-up questions with the Education Ministry and its team here today. And also we will have the same approach to the Ministry of Youth Development and National Service. And in that round, Member Monroe will start, followed by other members chiming in with questions or inquiries or comments, following Member Monroe's first interventions with the Ministry of Youth Development and National Service. Before I pass over to Member Naked, Dr. Smith, who is the Chief Education Officer, you mentioned the global uptick in persons wishing to train themselves and being a part of TechVoc sectors around the world. Two questions. One, given the increase in the use of digital technologies, let me start with the first question to be, has that trend presented itself in Trinidad and Tobago? The information you presented in your opening comments about the global uptick in persons availing themselves of TechVoc training and going into that sector, is that the case in Trinidad and Tobago? Are we in line with that trend? And two, because digital technologies have become even more pervasive, they were pervasive before the pandemic, how much more are we seeing an uptick of persons going into TechVoc training to service this increase in digital services in Trinidad and Tobago, maintenance, innovation, etc.?
So thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. So what we will do, we will take it from the perspective of the school at this point in time. And at this point, I'll ask Mr. Peter Fraser to provide that response, and then we'll go to the other arms of the ministry.
Yes, so good morning again to the panel and to everyone viewing public. And so in terms of the digital, well, TVET itself basically has moved also in terms of to the digital platform, in terms of teachers utilizing, of course, Teams, Zooms, and Google Meet in terms of training and lessons for teachers. Also the use of simulation software, especially in areas where we have electrical and electronic technology, those areas being taught in schools. Teachers would have moved to utilizing playlists in terms of using YouTube videos. We would have also used in terms of simulation software, multi-sim, which is one of the software being used in electrical and electronic technology. Also to the implementation and utilization of the school learning management system, in which we would have had curriculum officers as well as teachers providing lessons on the platform, so that teachers would have been able to use that platform in terms of accessing lessons there. At that time too, we would have had, especially during the COVID, lessons that would have been provided on TV, on the television, especially when we look at TVET Form 1 and Form 3 for the technology education, which is taught at Form 1 and Form 3. Curriculum officers themselves are also engaged in online training and also of teachers and at least trying to assist teachers in using the digital media platform for teaching their students and so forth. They move also, students also complete their CXC SBA assignments, and you will also see CBQ assignments. We have moved to e-portfolios in some circumstances where CXC have accepted the e-portfolios, so students are required to complete portfolios. They can be physical, but a lot of schools now are.
I'm sorry to interrupt, Mr. Fraser. I think the question I was trying to get at is based on the fact that we are using more technology in every sector, education and every other sector. Is there a move from the ministry's perspective, an increase in the number of persons seeking to train themselves to service these technologies? Dr. Smith indicated there's a global uptick in training for TVET in several sectors. Has that been presented in Trinidad and Tobago? Do we have an uptick in training persons wishing to be a part of that sector, TVET and other technology-driven sectors in terms of training themselves? And is that also what we're seeing in terms of persons who are coming into the sector? Was what I wanted to get from the information I wanted to get.
Okay, so I would have, so I would have basically looked at really utilizing the digital platform in terms of sensitizing teachers and training teachers in terms of utilizing those platforms now for classes and implementation of TVET.
Chair, if I may, I know at YTEP there is some work being done in that area, so I can ask Ms. Ava Bailey Jackman to give her perspective.
Thank you.
Yes.
Good morning to the committee and the members of the representative board. Yes, YTEP Limited did see some increase in the
Ms. Billy Jackman, we hardly hear you. Could you speak up a bit, please?
Okay.
Thank you.
I apologize. Are you hearing me now?
Yes, we're hearing you better now. Thank you.
Okay, good. We did see interest in technical and vocational education and training, and we did make several efforts within the confines of the challenges of the pandemic to ensure that we continue to meet our mandate. However, we found that our trainees lacked the resources that were necessary for us to continue during that period. Persons were unable to access the internet in some cases. Some persons were unable to access the software that was needed in some cases. And of course, we had persons who were unable to navigate the spaces. Prior to the pandemic, YTEP Limited actually did start introducing technology-enabled learning. And as a result of that, we already had a learning management system up and running. So we sought to expand the use of that learning management system at the time. But we had some challenges with persons being able to navigate the space. We also tried to some feedback. We also attempted to use Zoom and Teams and other facilities in order to continue our classes. It was difficult because we were not able to manage the hands-on.
Prior to the pandemic, had you seen an increase in the number of persons accessing training at WITEP in technical areas?
In terms of some courses being oversubscribed, yes. However, we tried to accommodate as many as we could within the resources that we did have at the time.
Thank you. Member Naked, you can go ahead, please. Member Naked.
Thank you, Chair. For the Ministry of Education, Dr. Smith, Mr. Fraser, given that there's a greater demand for training in the areas of renewable energy, particularly when it comes to photovoltaics and vehicle hybrid technology, and also agricultural training options, how is the ministry assisting or contributing to formulating and designing training courses to meet this new demand?
Okay. In terms of, well, I will answer in terms of the new technologies, in terms of hybrid technologies and so forth. The school, in schools, certifications that it's offered, they are offered at CSEC, and we also have the Caribbean vocational qualifications. The Caribbean vocational qualifications, they utilize what we call occupational standards to prepare students for the world of work. In terms of the new technologies, what I can say in terms of hybrid systems, recently CANTA, which would be the CARICOM Association of National Training Agencies, would have ratified new and approved new occupational standards for those areas in terms of automotive technology, in terms of hybrid vehicles. And in the school system itself, there are a number of areas in agriculture that are being taught at certification for the CVQ in schools. So we'll have livestock rearing, even rabbit rearing would be one of the areas, crop production, right? Grow box operations and those other areas. There's a large range of areas in agriculture that that it's being taught in schools, and of course utilizing technologies in those areas.
Well, given those 4 areas that I mentioned, of those 4 areas, how many of those areas are you satisfied with where you are right now?
Well, in the school system itself, basically the offerings are at a more foundation level. So the preparation is not really to enter with full qualifications in the world of work, but basically for students to gain foundations that they can move on at post-secondary level to attain higher qualifications, right? So basically, you would say that for the CVQ offerings, it's basically pitted at what we'll call a pre-craft level, or what we'll have a entry level or semi-entry level worker, right? And of course, the CSEC curricula would be more at what we'll call pre-technician, which is a broader sort of curriculum and more advances someone to maybe a technician level program at post-secondary and so forth. So I think in terms of looking at the expansion of TVET in those particular areas, you'll be more looking at post-secondary in that regard, in terms of finalization of your certification and qualifications.
Well, then I'll have to expand on this because I think it's important. So if you're talking about post-secondary, then what infrastructure is in place to accommodate the students post-secondary through this program, these programs? Where do you have lined up?
So, Chair, if I may, I can probably ask Mr. Ramnarayan from MIC to respond.
Absolutely. Mr. Ramnarayan?
Yes, Chair, good morning. Good morning to all. In terms of the next step, at this time, MIC is currently running a couple of short courses in renewable energy, particularly solar, photovoltaic, and hybrid auto repairs. There are plans afoot very shortly in discussions with the Ministry of Education to expand these offerings to a higher level, which is equal to our level 3 and the old qualification framework, the journeyman program. So we are actually at this time very aggressively pursuing that. We are very much behind, I would admit, on this, but that was particularly because of COVID. That has set us back a little bit. But we have taken the battle again, and within the next 3 to 6 months, there will be higher level programs. And of course, immediately, we have an aggressive campaign going on to do our short courses, 45 hour programs that has been very successful so far. I must add also that some of our graduates and of course trainees then, they worked on the first solar operated gas station in Presal, Hoover, which was a huge achievement for us. So these are the kind of initiatives that the MICs continue to partner on. I don't want to say too much into another project, but there's another large contract that has been awarded, and MIC has been asked to supply some of our past graduates into that space. Yeah.
Well, I was going to ask you if I could remember, I was just going to ask Mr. Ramnarayan if there is an increase in persons seeking training at MIC, given what you've outlined with the solar panels, the photovoltaic cells, the hybrid cars, and what kind of prospects do they have in terms of employment, sustainable employment in Trinidad and Tobago, if you are putting emphasis on training persons and developing curricula and courses for these areas?
Yes, the question answered piece by piece. Yes, there has been a demand. Because of the fact of course, the global agenda and renewable energies, and of course, locally, based on the government's agenda to go green. There has been a number of projects that has been awarded recently, and these awardees have been coming to MIC to seek for participants. So that being said, there has been an increase in demand for persons in this renewable sector, which is very good for us.
Ma'am Naked. Mic is still muted. Your mic is still muted, Member Naked.
Okay, sorry, Chair. Is the ministry satisfied that the changes the CXC has made to the syllabi for TVET subjects would equip students to effectively transition to a higher level of competency in the respective fields? Are you satisfied with the changes the CXC has made?
Yes, in terms of curricula utilized in schools, the CSEC curricula utilized in school, there's more demand in terms of practical, ensuring that the students are engaged in more practical activities, there are more practical assignments in terms of the SBAs. The CXC itself also, especially with the industrial technology curricula, have instituted an area, a core element in it, which exposes students to more interdisciplinary or more industrial, they sensitize them to more industrial needs of industry. So what you will find in those core areas of the curriculum, and those, when I say industrial technology, those will include areas like electrical and electronic technology, mechanical technology, building and furniture technology. That core area will concentrate on health and safety issues, the use of ICTs, and there are SBAs to reflect those things in which students are marked on. Communication skills in terms of students doing things like accident reports and those things like that. A knowledge of the organizational structure of industry. So they would look at flat structure, matrix systems, and so forth. Skills in terms of design skills, those elements, and even entrepreneurial skills in terms of students are required to complete a business plan. There's a focus basically for the CSEC curriculum in terms of continuous assessments, which are practicals that would be done in school-based assessments, even in the home economics areas in business like electronic document preparation, management and preparation, and preparation. And what we would have seen in terms of that focus on the practical areas is that those SBA marks have been increased. So especially in the industrial technology areas, you would find that the SBA marks now go from 40% of the overall marks to now 50% of the overall mark, because the preparation is basically preparing students to go into the world of work with the necessary skills that is needed. So the emphasis there is in trying to prepare students with those practical skills, as well as those employability skills that I would have mentioned. Hence the reason for the core elements in curriculum.
Well, hold on there, Mr. Fraser. Since you mentioned the practical aspect of it, which we are very interested in, because this is a very hands-on. This is not, like the legal professional, so where it's basically a lot of theory. So what is the level of synergy that you have implemented with those students while they are learning the theoretical part of it? What's the level of synergy you have with the actual industries in terms of internships and so with these students? Can you give us an update on that?
Well, at the school level, basically what would occur is that students would be engaged in field trips and those things. But in terms of being engaged in the world of work or being exposed to the world of work externally, there are certain issues there for students at that age in terms of, because these are students who would be engaged in these subjects at the age of 15 and 16. So that because they are being prepared at pre-craft level and pre-technician level, most of the practical activities occur in the school system. However, there are some schools that do have CBQ at level 2, and the CBQ at level 2 would, especially in the area like pan manufacturing, may have people that may come into the system externally to assist students in real world of work activities, areas like cosmetology, and you may have it in some areas in terms of the culinary arts, food preparation, and so forth. There's some element of engagement, but we have to take into account students at the age of the students and certain aspects to account for in terms of insurance and those things.
Okay, we're going to open it. Member Mohit, do you have a follow-up question?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. Based on the responses given, can I just ask a quick question? And it relates to what those representatives would have stated. And I'd like to ask whether the practice of students pursuing basic proficiency in subject areas of maths and English is still in effect, and whether the Ministry of Education would not consider this an affront to the student population at large. In other words, an inherent inferiority complex.
Okay, so Chair, if I may, at this point in time, we have no basic proficiency at the school level. It is general proficiency for the math.
Okay, thanks.
Well, I have a question, a follow-up question based on that. Chair, Mr. Dr. Smith, earlier on you mentioned the perceptions about TVET, and in relation to some areas in the education sector where there are challenges with literacy and numeracy. Is that part of that perception that you referenced earlier on? And if it is, how is the curriculum designed to remediate that while also pursuing one's training in the specific technical area?
So yes, good. Thank you very much for that question. Yes, that aspect of the challenges with both literacy and numeracy does affect how persons perceive TVET, and it's perhaps well known by some that if you aren't able to cope with the academics, then you go the line of the TVET, those practical subjects, which is not really a realistic understanding of what is involved in TVET. As Mr. Fraser would have indicated, we both have the theory as well as the practical component that needs to be addressed.
So then what is the ministry doing to reverse that perception, one, nationally, while also understanding that you will have a variety of students coming to do TVET training, because the perception is that, okay, well, I can't make any classical subjects, they will shunt me off to TVET, when that should not be the perception. It should be that I have a real interest in this. It is a viable employment opportunity for me, and it can contribute significantly and sustainable to national development.
So currently what the ministry is doing is trying to ensure that our students achieve what we refer to as minimum standards in at least two key areas, your numeracy and literacy, which would allow our students to access these courses. We would have, of recent as this term, announced the school operations in selected schools, whereby there are programs designed to target these two key areas, numeracy and literacy, with the intention of exposing our students to TVET areas as they proceed at the secondary school level. So remediation programs are being put in place at this point in time to ensure that there is a bridge, that those literacy and numeracy areas are satisfactorily addressed.
Member Nakil?
I would like to stay on that point because I think the chairman brought it up earlier, not to you guys, but to us. It's the perception of TVET and TVOC. What is the ministry actively doing in terms of public awareness, in terms of the national consciousness about the importance of these programs, maybe in terms of wage structure? I know the chair will go into that probably a bit later, but what is the ministry doing to elevate the status of these jobs and these vocations?
So let's look at it from the secondary school perspective in this regard. So students that enter into one of the core areas of the curriculum at Form 1 to Form 3, one of the areas, technology education. So all students are basically engaged in Form 1 to Form 3 in technology education, which basically prepares them with most of the 21st century skills to actually enter the world of work eventually, or to engage in TVET subjects, or I should say give them the options to engage in TVET subjects in Form 1 to in Form 4 and Form 5. The technology education basically introduce students one of the main skills, the problem-solving skills, and they utilize a model which is called the ideate model. So what you would find is that students are now engaged in those, utilizing that model in terms of they will be given a challenge and utilize that model in terms of
Mr. Fraser, I think
Mr. Fraser,
maybe
sorry,
I'm following Mr. Manakid wrong. Manakid asked about what the ministry is doing to raise public awareness about the importance of TVET and TVET subjects in the context of viable jobs on par with some other sectors, and changing perceptions about it in terms of it being a viable point of endeavor for the students. Remember, am I wrong? Because there's a perception that there are low-paying jobs in many instances.
Completely on point, Chairman. Completely on point.
Yeah, So basically, the point really was exposing all students to TVET from the standpoint in Form 1 to Form 3, from utilizing technology education as one of those areas. So what you would find is that you are basically, because it's general education, you are basically exposing, giving students options, so that what you would find happening is that by the time students have to select subjects in Form 3, they are aware of all the different areas in TVET.
But being aware, if I can interrupt, being aware of the areas of TVET and making them attractive are two completely different things. Because you don't have to advertise the pay structure of a doctor or a lawyer. But if you are to make these areas attractive, you need public awareness programs and ad campaigns to show students that, well, if I enter the sector for agricultural training and agro-processing, there is a line that takes me to a viable job that can sustain my family. And I think that is what Member Naked is getting. And there's a pay structure and a remuneration expectation based on the value placed on that training. Am I wrong, Member Naked?
I'm completely on point, Chair. And I'd just like to add to
and
that.
I'm not getting the answer for that. If there's a program to apprise trainees of the line or maybe a matriculation path to higher education through these programs, that will make, while all are exposed at an early level in secondary school, it makes this an attractive point of endeavor for me as a student in the context of Trinidad and Tobago.
Okay, so Chair, if I may, I'm hearing perhaps the whole issue of equivalency here, and perhaps I can ask
Absolutely.
Dr. Patrice's to elaborate on this point.
So thank you again, Mr. Chair, and good morning to the members. So let me start. Okay. We are all aware that, yes, there is a disparity at this point in time in terms of how TVET is conceptualized and seen in the community. But it is not necessarily something that is going to be a quick fix, because it is calling for a cultural mind change and an adjustment in terms of the society. What we have been doing at the NTA is that we have been engaging a whole host of industry representatives. These are persons who show up when they are called and requested to help us articulate exactly what the occupational standards are for each of the areas. That sets out exactly the competencies, the knowledge, the attitudes that will be required by industry for persons to be gainfully employed. Once we have those occupational standards, we utilize that as part of our promotional tool. We engage the community as well as the school population to say, look, these are the careers that you can do and that can be engaged in. And when you go into these areas, this is what will be expected of you. We can articulate exactly the competencies, the environment in which you're working, and we are also able to make some rudimentary predictions in terms of what your livelihood is going to look like. That is what we have traditionally been doing. Now, more recently, to allow for the equivalency, the Accreditation Council of Trinidad and Tobago and the National Training Agency would have collaborated to develop the National Qualification Framework for Trinidad and Tobago. That is the translation tool that we are asking all institutions, whether they are the training providers and educational institutions or the industry members, to look at qualifications on the basis of what a graduate is supposed to do at the end of the day. That is where the translation is going to come, because then the persons are able to compare a qualification that would have come out from a traditional post-secondary or university setting and look at what is coming out from technical vocational institutions to see if it is that there is an easy articulation. We are hoping that with the full rollout of the NQF for Trinidad and Tobago, it would allow for those bridges and connecting points so that someone can start off in a WITEP at a level 1, level 2, give the competencies. Through the mapping and the alignment, MIC might say, okay, we will accept this level 1 from WITEP into our journeyman program, which is now at the level 3, level 4. The persons now go there, and through the intervention of, again, another mapping, UTT may get involved to say, okay, with an augmenting of your literacy and numeracy and perhaps science, we will accept a graduate from the journeyman program to do our BSc in engineering. So we have been actively working towards creating that translation device, and that is the national qualification for Trinidad and Tobago. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you so much. That's kind of what I was looking for. Before we're going to be moving to the Ministry of Youth Development and National Service, but just and putting Member Monroe on standby to start his line of questioning. But as we close off at the moment with the Education Ministry, I don't know which of your team would take this, Dr. Smith, including Mr. Ramnarayan, Dr. Paris Salis, or Ms. Billy Jackman. But in terms of the opportunities available, not only in Trinidad and Tobago, I know there was a move at some point to standardize across the region TVET qualifications, so persons who were trained could move across the Caribbean and get employment opportunities. Is that also part of your pursuit under the championing of this sector in Trinidad and Tobago and training persons for opportunities, not only in Trinidad and Tobago, but certainly in the wider Caribbean and I know in the energy sector around the world?
Okay, so Chair, again, I can perhaps ask Dr. Searles to respond.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Smith. And Chair, with your leave, yes, to answer your question, what would have been ratified some time ago would have been the CARICOM qualification framework. And as a member of CARICOM, we, Trinidad and Tobago, would have tied into that system, and we have ensured that the developed qualification framework that we have right now, the National Qualification Framework for Trinidad and Tobago, is in alignment with the Caribbean Qualification Framework, CARICOM Qualification Framework. But more importantly, because of that umbrella agency that is represented by the Caribbean Association of National Training Agencies, what we have done is that each member state has the opportunity to engage their industry persons to develop the occupational standards in their areas, in different vocational areas. So that in doing so, one community doesn't have to do all occupational areas, it's spread out. Once a member state has developed their occupational standard, we have a rigorous vetting process by which all member states get copies of those occupational standards. We have the opportunity, therefore, to go and meet with our industry representatives and say, look, this is what is articulated for renewable energy technician. Is this suitable for Trinidad and Tobago's context? Is it fit for purpose? And once we have gotten the sanction by our industry persons, we are able to vote at the regional level for the acceptance of those occupational standards. So that now represents the standard across the region. It goes up to COSOD and CARICOM. And just recently, CARICOM would have approved 46 occupational standards. inclusive of renewable energies, the hybrid vehicles, the solar panel. I don't want to massacre the photovoltaic sector, but yes, because of the spread with all member states working simultaneously, we are able to get those occupational standards completed, and that in fact would then standardize the qualification and allow for someone who is trained in Trinidad and Tobago to be able to participate and benefit from the CSME and move to the other areas. Yes?
Thank you. Just before we go to Member Monroe, Member Mohit, you had a follow-up question, and then Member Monroe. We'll move to the Ministry of Youth Development and National Service. Member Mohit, go ahead, please.
Yes, sure, Mr. Chairman. Just a follow-up question in light of what was just stated, whether an update can be given in terms of the previous or current initiative of certifying those persons with experience in the various tech work fields, which was really touted to allow such persons to become more marketable. So can we have an answer, an update on that?
So, Chair, if I may, because I think what the member is referencing here would have been the workforce assessment centers, where we would have applied the prior learning assessment and recognition system to allow for persons who might have been practitioners in different areas to get certification. So yes, in terms of an update, the NTA continues to approve agencies, whether it is corporate agencies or training providers, to do that prior learning assessment. And they are now established as workforce assessment centers, where any member of the public who feels that they have looked at the occupational standard and they have all the competencies, knowledge, and attitudes that they feel that will allow them to be qualified can go submit themselves for assessment and then ultimately get certified. The certification can be done for the entire occupational area, or if it is that they are deemed only competent in some of the modules, they will get unit awards. That continues to occur, and at present, we do have in the virtual room approved workforce assessment centers in the body of MIC. They are a workforce assessment center for a number of vocational areas related to manufacturing, as well as Write-Up Limited.
Before I complete, can I just ask, what's the success rate of these centers thus far?
In terms of certification?
Yes.
So thank you for that question, Member Mohit. The reality, though, is that at this point in time, it is really on the interest of citizens to come forward. So I do know that we continue to field the request for external verification, the external validation of competencies from individual centers. But my understanding would be that it is not as high as we would like it to be. The numbers continue to be small. And I do not know if Mr. Ramnarine or Ms. Billy Chapman can bear me out here, but it really isn't as, the uptick hasn't been as what we would have expected it to be.
Do you have any form of educational campaign to encourage persons to come forward?
So, the reality is that, yes, we are working on continuing to engage members of the public. I think, however, in reality, that we perhaps need to revisit the method of engaging the stakeholders, because somehow persons are still overwhelmed by the thought of being tested, there is a need for us to approach it in a more down-to-earth grassroots, perhaps bringing more testimonials from persons who have successfully gone through it and can speak to it, the ease of which they can get their certification and the benefit of it, of being certified at the end of the day. So while we have been doing some work, I would, in all honesty, admit that there's more that we can do. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you so much, Dr. Patrice Paris-Sales. We're moving now to the Ministry of Youth Development and National Service. Earlier on, the Permanent Secretary, Mr. Farouk Hussein, indicated that there are 544,000 persons considered between the ages of 10 to 35, which comprises 40% of the population, which is just over 1/3, which is quite substantial. So the ministry has quite a bit of work to do. Member Monroe, you can start, and we will chime in after your first round of questioning. Go ahead, please.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Once again, good morning to the team from the Ministry of Education and to the team from the Ministry of Youth and National Services. And most importantly, good morning to your viewing and listening members of the public. Chairman, with your permission, before I ask my questions to the Ministry of Youth and National Services, may I be afforded a minute or two just to chime in on something that I really find placed
not a problem. Go ahead.
Chairman, the discussion at hand with respect to the TVET and TVET issues is one that lays heavy on my heart, and I will say why. I represent the FAR constituency at the northeast of Trinidad, Togo Sangre Grande to be exact, which ends all the way in Matlet. And based on my experience, I have had interactions with many persons who participate in TVET and TVET courses. However, they somehow feel as if they are at the lower end or at the back burner of the educational system, because those courses and the persons who partake in those courses are not as recognized as others who would have been successful at the academical level. I would like to just put forward my personal views with respect to persons who are participants of those courses. So Chairman, I see personally situations that arise before me with persons, and I deal directly with persons who carry out those functions, those courses, those trade works. And I would like to just make this clear comparison. I see a person who is a vehicle mechanic as a doctor, or as in the same light as a doctor, and I will tell you why. Just recently, in the recently flooding situation in my constituency, a doctor would have been caught up in the middle of floodwaters, and he happened, luckily, to make it out on the other end, but the vehicle stalled there. And he waited there for approximately 3 hours for a mechanic to come and relieve him of his stress, which is to repair this vehicle. So in that case, a doctor who is a professional in his field was waiting for a doctor to see about his vehicle, because he could not done what that person could do. Although that course is a TVET course that person would have pursued. So they are all specialists in their own areas. For instance, an attorney at law may call out his plumber or mason or carpenter, and they go to the hardware. He accompany that professional, the attorney at law, to the hardware to purchase some materials. And in that case, I see that person now as being really representative of that attorney in the hardware. It's not in the courtroom, but in that scenario, he's that representative. So I really would like to see strong efforts be made to really give persons in those fields a real meaningful chance of developing themselves and be respected for the services that they provide to this nation. Thank you very much, Chairman.
Well said. We can go ahead with your line of questioning for the ministry now.
Nice. So to the Ministry of Youth and National Services, I have a couple of questions here, and it's based on your submission. You would have submitted a list of program and courses that will be delivered at the youth development and apprenticeship centers that would be set up throughout this nation. My first question is, what is the target age group of these programs and courses?
Good morning again. With me is Mr. Sean Ramratan, who was a member of the Advisory Committee on the Youth Development and Apprenticeship Center. And that committee prepared a report which sought to update the curriculum for the YDACs. And I would ask Mr. Ramratan to assist us in that question with your leave, Chair.
Go ahead, please.
Good morning to the panel and the public. With respect to the question, at the YDACs, we are looking at the age 15 to 25 for the youth development and apprenticeship centers. We also have what you call the youth development centers, and they would take the ages up to 35. So they would be looking at 15 to 35 because the youth age in Trinidad, as defined by the Youth Policy 2020 to 2025, is 15 to 35. Okay, sorry, 10 to 35. My error there. In terms of the training, we are again going to be focusing on that category of youth in need, not in education, employment, or training. And we refer to them as the policy document, as well as in the report of the committee as the Act Promise youth. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And may I ask, what is the recruitment strategy for enrollment?
Okay, basically, in terms of enrollment, the strategy, the ministry, in terms of its approach, in particular to the WIDAC, and in general, in terms of all our TVET programs, we advertise in both the print and electronic media, and we use very attractive, enticing type advertisement with visuals and optics that the young people could relate the training to occupational fields. So if you look at our web pages, our Instagram page and Twitter, you will recognize that we use those platforms and we have very attractive, colorful advertisements that would encourage young people to apply. Then there would be a panel that would review and shortlist the application based on the criteria set. And then we will also have face-to-face interviews with the clients or prospective trainees to assess their ability for the respective programs, as well as if a trainee doesn't fit the profile for our program, we will refer to another program that we feel he or she might best fit. Thank you.
Thank you. Another question.
Chairman, sorry, can I make a brief intervention?
Just
Member Monroe?
Yes, go ahead.
It has to do with what I would call it's a bit of ageism. Now, I know you mentioned that there was an age of 25, and then you had some subsequent programs that will go until the age of 35. But there was a recent article in The Guardian, I think, about a young man, Daniel Ayong was his name, who said that he was part of the My DNS, and that because of his age, he had only 1 year left. I think he mentioned that he had a level of training for 2 years, but because of his age, he had 1 year, and then he didn't know what he would do. Now, I'm thinking, just expanding on that. When you look at first world countries, there's no limit, age limit, because you never know the circumstances of individuals within the country. This boy was homeless.
The question you're asking is a policy question.
Yes, but it has to do with the age. Why the age limit? Yes. When we have a level of skill,
right?
When we look into
that. But
why is there the limit with the age, Chair? This is the question.
So that's a policy question, and I think this team before us is not able to answer that question. I understand your question, but that is a policy question that this team cannot answer. All right, Member Monroe, go ahead, please.
Thank you very much, Chairman. My follow-up question is, what incentives, if any, are offered for enrollment in these programs?
Okay, in terms of incentives, there are additional activities that take place at the centers. So we have a lot of cultural type programs. We have sporting activities that take place. Some people may also consider this incentives, but at the ministry, we look at it as a necessity which is sometimes referred to as a stipend. So some people see it as an incentive, but it is not. It is actually a resource that we provide the young person to help them with commuting sometimes, as well as purchasing, meals to ensure that, they can partake in the programs. So those are some of the incentives. Additionally, in terms of, there's a placement unit at the ministry that looks at the end of the program, trying to place young people in occupational fields, in terms of the industry or the training that they would have been involved in. So those are some of the incentives currently.
Just before Member Monroe continues, and I know Member Mohit has a follow-up question. Going back to the recruitment strategy for enrollment, what is the target number of persons that the ministry has in a particular time frame? And how is the ministry ensuring that the recruitment strategy ensures that the persons who are enrolled or who have an opportunity to enroll from in particular areas from across the country and geographically diverse?
Also under the purview of our ministry are the specialized youth services programs, the CCC, the MyLAT and MyPath. The director of that program is with us, Major Benjamin, and I will ask him to assist us with a response.
Thank you very much, Chair and members, and good morning to the listening public. In terms of the recruitment strategy for youth programs in general, right? The specialized youth service programs encompass the Civilian Conservation Corps program, the MyLAT, military-led academic training program, and MyPath program, military-led youth program of apprenticeship and reorientation training. Also the CHINS program, Children in Need of Supervision, under the auspices of the SYSP, which is managed by the Trinidad and Tobago Defense Force on behalf of the Ministry of Youth Development and National Service. These programs are spread throughout the length and breadth of Trinidad and Tobago. The Civilian Conservation Corps program being established in all of the parishes, because we use the parish system to cite our programs originally. The program is over approximately 29 years in existence. And now we're looking to make sure that that program's reach has persons from all parishes, and also we have a reach in Tobago as well. So in terms of geography, we have a reach throughout all of the 7 regions of Trinidad and one region.
But are those strictly intervention programs, or are those generalized programs that anyone can access? Because I know MyLAT and MyPath, correct me if I'm wrong, but are intervention programs.
Chair, you are correct. The MyLAT and MyPath are intervention programs with a particular catchment that they cater for. The Civilian Conservation Corps program is also an intervention, but it really caters for persons who are most in need of that intermediary support, that bridging system coming out of the secondary school system to be able to find their way towards employability and the gaining of specialized skills. However, using a targeted approach when we focus on persons who need what we call additional support, attitudinal change, attitudinal adjustment in preparation for the workplace.
But then it opens a question to the PS. Is your focus on TVET focused primarily targeting youth who are considered vulnerable youth, or is it any young person falling within the age category identified who can access these programs? Because Major Benjamin identified persons who seem to be running in a category of vulnerable youth or youth at risk. Is that correct, or am I getting the wrong impression here?
We cater for both. While the SYSP, the Specialized Youth Services Programs, the CCC, the MyLAT and the MyPAT intervention programs. We also have other programs that are managed by the Youth Affairs Division, for example, in the area of heavy equipment, music, and so on. So I'll ask Mr. Ramratan to give some further details on those programs that are more general and not intervention type programs.
You see, why I asked the question, and Member Mohit, please stand by, is we spoke earlier on about perceptions. Perceptions that TVET programs and TVET programs are for a particular cadre of persons. And while I have no problem with persons who are at risk or vulnerable being given access to training in these areas, it seems to be reinforcing a particular stereotype. Am I wrong?
Well, we cater for all youths, both those quote unquote at risk or at promise, as well as the general youth population. So while some of our programs might be targeting those particular individuals who have special needs, there are programs that are general in nature. For example, someone is interested in music production. We have the Amplify project that especially caters for that particular person. That person might be academically inclined, but has an interest in music. So our Amplify program seeks to provide training in that area. In terms of heavy equipment, we have a program all set, which is not necessarily catered for persons with special needs, but someone who is specifically interested in heavy equipment operations. So we cater for both general as well as those with special needs.
Well, special interests.
Special interests, yes.
Yeah. Member Mohit, go ahead, and then Member Monroe, you can continue.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chair, seeing that we are on the discussion of incentives as well as intervention, I would like to focus a little bit on the graduates, and I would like to ask the Ministry of Youth Affairs to indicate whether any thought processes have been given to possibly engaging the construction sector, the agricultural sector, etc., to utilize the skill sets of the TVET graduates along the similar vein of the OJT program, since this can create a symbiotic relationship between both parties against those persons gaining experience whilst accessing a stipend after they graduate.
Okay. So in response to that question, for example, one of the programs that we have is the Youth Agricultural Homestead Project. And that would have had over 1,400 applicants. And when we looked at the applicants, we recognized that they were applicants who would have completed the diploma program in agriculture at ECIAF. We even had some students from the University of the West Indies who would have completed their master's program. And we have those students now enrolled in that Youth Agriculture Homestead Project, which is a stipend program. It has a stipend, and they are continuing their training in terms of achieving a certificate in agricultural production, production and husbandry. So the young persons, the incentives for those young persons do exist who have completed programs.
Thank you very much, Chairman. So the Ministry of Youth and National Services. I continue. I would like to know, for those graduates of these programs and courses, what strategy is in place to funnel them into the place of employment?
All right. Okay, Major Benjamin would assist us in the response.
Member, thank you very much for that question. In the Civilian Conservation Corps program, we would have looked at the results about a tracer study that was done between 2015 to 2018. And one of the key results there were that persons graduating from the program, while they were certified at TVET level 1, were not introduced to the potential workforce. So there was a bridging challenge in terms of getting them into job opportunities. We have introduced in the last 2 cycles of the Civilian Conservation Corps, and more so in the last cycle graduating in September of this year, an internship program, which lasts for a period of 2 months at the end of the cycle. That internship program is now has seen to be an impactful bridging point where employers who have actually offered persons who were interns employment in their particular fields. So to date, we are of the 727 persons that would have graduated in the last intake, we have over 200 persons that would have been employed so far to date. And we're still tracking that to see what the success rate is on our internship initiative.
Okay, so basically you would have just mentioned that there's some level of filtering of these trainees. However, 200 plus out of 7, something that you would have mentioned, right? Is there any other plans of the ministry to ramp up that number to see a higher number of persons, trainees, finding employment?
And if I could add to that question that Member Monroe is adding, what sort of consultations are you having with the private sector, given your training record and your output of graduates, in terms of including them in their workforce catchment? Because there's a constant cry in many private sector enterprises that they can't find persons to fill positions. Is that part of what your strategy is in terms of helping your graduates to find employment, collaboration with private sector entities?
Specifically in terms of identifying the technical vocational areas that training is provided for by the ministry, that is a consideration that is taken into account. Major Benjamin under the SYSP and Mr. Ramratan under the Youth Affairs program, they would have identified specific technical vocational areas in which there would be a need for persons when those particular areas. And among these are, for example, small engine repairs, culinary arts, cosmetology, computer repairs, etc. So there is always that interaction between officials of the ministry and the industry to identify areas where there are needs, so that we would cater in terms of providing the training to fit those needs.
Do you also provide some level of basic business acumen in your training so that persons who graduate can start to have a sense of either forming their own business or being able to negotiate with a business for the best outcome in terms of remuneration packages and employment?
Certainly, in all our programs, even the programs that I mentioned before, like the Amplify, which deals with music, and Allset heavy equipment operations, there is that element of entrepreneurship as well as in the specialized youth service programs. So I'll ask Mr. Ramratan to provide some details on those.
Yes.
Thank you.
So as the panel agreed public again to elaborate, yes, all our programs that are delivered, they have components of entrepreneurship training, budgeting, as well as national service, so that we are not only creating the opportunity for young people to acquire skill for employment, but also to become their own employers, so they can actually open businesses. So we are looking at ensuring that they look at the option of entrepreneurship as well. So there definitely is that element in terms of business training and entrepreneurship training, as well as national service, so that they understand their role in terms of society.
Your submission indicates that the ministry intends to construct 12 additional facilities for youth in various catchment areas, including but not limited to La Horquita, Moruga, Enterprise, Sealots, Maloney, Aruca, Mayaro, and Beetham Estate. How did the ministry identify these areas for the construction of these 12 catchment area facilities?
Okay. Those areas would have been identified by our project unit in collaboration with our Youth Affairs Division. Ms. Janine Benjamin, who heads that unit, is with us, and I'll ask her to provide some details in that regard.
Thank you.
Ms. Benjamin.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. So when we are assessing the areas that we would like to open our centers in, we do a comprehensive assessment, and that will include looking at the density of the population in the area, how many youth are in that area that would need, have that need for training. We also look at if the area is looked at as a hotspot in terms of Trinidad and Tobago and their crime rate, and we would really want to have some sort of intervention in those types of areas as we aim to try to reduce the amount of youth turning to crime. We also look at if the area is depressed, if it is a depressed community and has the number of vulnerable youth that would be seeking further education and training in order to gain employment. We also look at the need for skill training of the youth in that area. So it might be an area that would be close to a particular type of industry, and we would try to provide training so that the persons, the youth in that area would be able to get employed. We would also look at if the area is one that is remote and going to a separate community would be difficult. So we would try to target the areas to make training as easy as possible and go into the areas that need it. Those are the general categories that we use, but it is not limited to, and we are always open to looking at different areas where there is a need.
Member Monroe and then Member Mohit. Member Monroe, go ahead, please.
Thank you very much, Chairman, for that question. And I would like to come on the heels of that question. I would have just heard you mention that the closest center in the northeast to the northeast district is La Horquita. I would like to ask the ministry, has any consultation or consideration been taken into place for the young men and women of the far northeast, and I will call some communities, which is all the way from Valencia to Matlot. And then we have on the other side, because I'm now talking as a region, the northeast region here. I'm talking about the constituency of Komoto, Manzalina, Waiku, Tamana, Manzalina, all these communities here. These areas, because of our geographic location, we are somewhat at a disadvantage. And what consideration is being taken or would be put into place to consider the young men and women of this part?
So thank you for that question. And we are definitely considering that area. I know we conducted a site visit in Turure and we were looking at areas where we could get our youth development center built, and that continues to be a discussion and hopefully could be carded for this fiscal. So we are looking at all areas, especially those that are remote, northeast, Trinidad included, and we continue to have the area in Tururi that was identified earmarked for youth development center.
Thank you very much.
Mohit, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I had a follow-up question a little while back. I was having some difficulties. Mr. Chairman, I just want to go along the line of yourself and Member Monroe as it relates to the inclusion of private entities in terms of the graduates, which brings me back to my question previously as it relates to having any similar program, any thought processes and in terms of any similar program as it relates to the OJT program. Speaking about at-risk communities and intervention programs and whatnot, I think one of the most serious concerns that we have at this point in time is what happens after intervention. You intervene, you have persons participating. After participation, what is your success? Is it that the success is a certificate? What happens after that certificate? And it brings me back to the question of having a similar program to the OJT program for graduates. What exactly is in store for graduates? This is what we need to know. If you're partnering with private entities to ensure that persons are somewhat considered, how many persons have been considered? Is it just that we are in the discussion stage? What exactly is happening for those persons? Because you mentioned the community of enterprise, and I'm very concerned because, of course, that's in my constituency. So I really would like to know what happens after the certificate for graduates. In terms of employment, in terms of entrepreneurship, yes, we are speaking it, but what is happening to those persons who have graduated?
Yes, Hussein, is there someone you'd like to assign to that, or would you like to take that?
Okay, the Director of Youth will provide some details, but in terms of the past, what we had done with respect to SYSP was to do a tracer study in terms of identifying what has happened to the graduates. And Major Benjamin and our head of M&E is working on doing a terms of reference for a tracer study to be conducted in this fiscal as well. So in order to identify how many persons who have graduated from our programs are in employment or have opened their own business and the like. Mr. Ramartan will provide some further details.
Okay, so as Major Benjamin would have indicated earlier, once the program is completed, most of our programs will have a component of OJT. For example, the Youth Development and Apprenticeship Centers, where the young persons are nearing completion of their program, they would go on an OJT exercise, which would last about 3 months in the industry. So they actually get the world of work experience there. Now, what happens in most instances, based on the young person's performance, the company keeps them on. If the company doesn't keep them on, there's a placement unit. There's been a placement unit at the ministry that looks for placement for the young persons. How do they get those placements? Now, most of the instructors are very familiar with the industries, as well as what we refer to as youth development officers and youth development associates. They work in the community. So they liaise with businesses in the community, and we try to link the young persons to those opportunities. Additionally, just recently, I would have begun talks with the on-the-job training program, in particular with respect to Amplify as well as HU, because these are non-traditional areas of training that we are getting involved in, and we want to ensure that the OJT program would be able to afford these young persons opportunities. So we are currently in talks with the OJT program in terms of placement for the traditional and non-traditional programs that we are offering at the ministry. Thank you.
Ms. P.S. Hussain, based on the question Mohit asked, is it that you are working in close collaboration with the education ministries? Several of the stakeholders earlier on identified their own TVET program output and rollout. And there are a lot of similarities in what you're doing as a relatively new ministry, only starting in August of 2020. Is it that you're working in close collaboration with the education ministry, the Ministry of Social Development and Family Services, etc., so that they are not duplication of services and that you can align your objectives?
Certainly, we, as the Director of Youth Affairs would have mentioned, we are working with OJT in the Ministry of Labor in terms of identifying opportunities for those who have graduated from our training courses. But even in the conduct of those training courses, we are liaising with the Ministry of Education and its agencies. For example, we have conducted a training course in skills for technological and a diversified economy, where we provided training in coding, web designing, and mobile application development. And this was in conjunction with and partnering with MIC IT, and 450 persons would have participated in this program. So, and also we are partnering with YTEP and NESC as well in some of our training programs, so that if there is an agency that is already providing some training in a particular area, rather than reinventing the wheel, our ministry partners with that particular agency in expanding opportunities for young persons in training.
Great. I want to go back a bit to the education ministry because of the dovetail between the two ministries, obviously, in terms of youth intervention and providing opportunities for youth. And call on Dr. Smith again, if he can give us a sense. I know parts of your team today include the CEO of MIC, the CEO of NTA, the National Training Academy, the manager of research of YTEP. And if Dr. Smith can give us a sense of the enrollment level or the graduate levels numbers for persons in TVET programs over the last couple of years, so we get a sense of the trends in enrollment and also graduation, and what currently are the more popular programs being engaged by persons who are seeking to train themselves in technical, vocational, and TVET sector programs.
Thank you very much, Chair. I would like to pass on to Ms. Ava Billy Jackman of YTEP, who should be able to give us some more information in terms of the enrollment.
Thank you.
Good day, everyone. In terms of our enrollment over the past, and I can only speak to YTEP, right? Our enrollment over the past 5 years has in fact reduced, right? And that has been a source of concern for us.
Can you give us more raw numbers? What would it have been like 5 years ago? And what is the trend to date?
I would not be able to give, I would need to open some documents in order to give that particular.
Sure. Is it in the realm of 1,000, 5,000 annually?
Oh, annually, we train. Now, we need to understand as well that we do different types of training. We target different persons. So in terms of our core skills, our enrollment has been roughly 1,500 to 2,000 over the past few years. That is down from roughly 4,000 or so of 6 years ago. Right? But we also, not only do we do the core training in terms of skills.
Have you been able
like,
to do an assessment as to why enrollment is falling?
Well, in terms of our resources, having allocations to be exact, having been reduced over the past 5 to 6 years, we have not been able to service as many centers. So, for example, going back to part of the discussion that transpired before, geographically, we are no longer able to service the centers in all of the secondary schools that we used to. At one point in time, we were in approximately 26 centers, and right now we're down to 8.
Dr. Smith, is that a strategic decision or is that occurring by happenstance?
Chair, if it's okay with you, can I get that additional information and provide you with it in writing, please?
So you're not aware of it's a strategic decision to scale back YTEP, or is it that the students are just not thinking that YTEP, because I know once upon a time YTEP was very active in terms of marketing and advertising. YTEP was the go-to agency for persons who wanted to train themselves in technical vocational studies and other areas. But from what Mrs. Billy Jackman is saying, there seems to have been a drastic fallback from persons accessing YTEP funding generally, and their ability to service and continue to operate. So what's happening here?
As indicated, Chair, I am aware of the drop in some of the figures. I would need to get some additional information to respond to you comfortably.
Thank you. Can we ask the same question of Mr. Ramnarayan, where MIC is concerned, and also Dr. Paris Silas, where NT is concerned in terms of the enrollment levels and the trends over the last couple of years? Can we start with Mr. Ramnarayan?
Good day again, Chairman. In terms of our MIC, we follow the similar fate of our YTEP. For the last 5 or 6 years, our funding was cut by 50%. And so our annual allocation was basically the driving factor for us moving from, at one time, training in excess of 4,500 students per year to now on about 1,500. So basically this, I mean, we looking at it from a reasonable perspective, the cost per student, in terms of the allocation, led us to reduce in terms of what we can reasonably deliver on. So there is, I mean, if you ask another question, there is the demand, certainly, for more training, but of course, we're guided by the public purse and what is afforded to the Ministry of Education, and hence for 2 MIC's allocations.
Well, the Education Ministry receives the largest amount of funding, either first or second, in every budget for the last 15 or so years. Can I move to NT and ask the same question, please?
Okay, so thank you very much, Chair, and through you. The NTA does not actually do any training with the new participants, but we do have, as part of our research portfolio, we maintain a labor market dashboard online that any one of the committee members can access, that will give you the comprehensive enrollment data that we would have collected from 2011 to 2020. It will provide both the enrollment figures and then the final graduation figures. On the dashboard at this point in time, we have 143 training providers submitting their information. Based on that data, Chair, the reality is that we would have seen a significant fall in both the enrollment and graduation figures from 2017 to current. And that is for both private and public institutions. So while I do know that the public agencies may have an issue in terms of the quantum of subvention that they have been receiving, we are seeing a like fall in the private institutions as well. So it points to, at least in terms from where we sit, that something significantly has to be done in terms of reigniting and re-energizing persons to look at TVET as an option for employability. And and just, success within their personal esteem.
Thank you. So this inquiry's topic is an examination of the state of technical and vocational education programs and their contribution to achieving the developmental goals of Trinidad and Tobago. And from what three significant stakeholders have just told me, funding is an issue. Am I crazy to surmise that? And so the question coming from that to Dr. Smith, is funding negatively impact the ability of the state to champion technical and vocational education programs to ensure that they sustainably contribute to the development of Trinidad and Tobago?
Chair, funding is an issue. As you would know, the industry is resource intensive, but along with the funding, there's also the issue of the interest, as well as how the industry is perceived by persons who want to get into it.
Mr. Ramnarayan just told us plainly that there is a huge demand at MIC, but their resources cut by 50% does not allow them to accommodate as many students. Am I wrong?
No, you're not wrong, Chair.
So funding is an issue.
Yeah, funding is an issue.
So is there a strategy to deal with reduced funding in terms of championing TechVoc and TVET sector training? Because they're extremely important in national development, as we've seen in other jurisdictions. You started off by identifying in your opening statements that the global uptick in technical training, TVET training, is exponentially rising. Yet we in Trinidad and Tobago are seemingly reducing the funding for that. So it just sounds counterintuitive to me.
Okay, Chair, and your concern is noted, and hence in our proposed education policy paper 2022 to 2027, one of the areas that we have put on the front burner is the TVET sector going forward.
Okay, we coming up on the end of the inquiry. Is there any other question member Mohit would like to ask, and then member Monroe? And then we will invite the leads of our teams to deliver closing comments and thank them for being with us today. We start with member Mohit. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, again. Just a final question based on what was just stated in terms of enrollment reduction and whatnot. Can I ask whether there has been any consideration to streamline all the TechVoc institutions under one singular body, allowing for better program of qualification? Whether any type of consideration was given to that? Since, Mr. Chair, this would really help in terms of economies of scale and maybe more persons qualifying, etc.
Dr. Smith?
Chair, if I may, is it that Member Mohit is asking about one training body?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Okay.
So at this point, Member Mohit and Chair, I cannot confirm yes, but as was mentioned, it's definitely an area that we should be looking at going forward.
Sure.
Thank you. Member Monroe, any final questions?
Yes, Chair. Thank you very much. I would just like to know from the Ministry of Youth and National Services, which department or division of the ministry holds responsibility for monitoring and evaluation of the quality of programs and courses offered?
At the ministry, we have M&E unit, and that unit collaborates with all the various divisions of the ministry in providing a framework for monitoring and evaluation for the various programs. So there is an M&E unit at the ministry.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay. At this time, we'd like to invite Dr. Smith on behalf of your team to deliver any closing comments. And if any of your team would like, you think would like to deliver closing comments given their contribution, that will also be accepted at this time.
Thank you very much, Chair. So the Ministry of Education and its implementing institutions will continue to strive to ensure the educational and learning experiences of citizens are rewarding, lifelong, and prepare them for productive contributions towards the development of Trinidad and Tobago in the 21st century. We do acknowledge, Chair, those falling numbers and the need for us to embark on a more aggressive campaign to get our youths and as well as citizens into this most productive area. I would like to thank all members of the staff of the Ministry of Education, the heads of the various agencies, and all persons that assisted in providing information for this inquiry. I do hope that the committee and the public at large is satisfied by the responses provided and assured that the future of TVET in Trinidad and Tobago is of great importance to the Ministry of Education. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you so much, Mr. Hussain.
Thank you, Chair. The Ministry of Youth Development and National Service, MyDNS, is pleased to have provided information to this Joint Select Committee on Social Services and Public Administration on the TVET programs conducted by the ministry. And we look forward to continue the engagement with all stakeholders to ensure that the National Youth Development Agenda is implemented in a sustainable manner. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much. And both Dr. Smith, his team, and Mr. Farouk and his team are invited to submit any further information or comments to the Secretariat in writing. We'd appreciate that. It will be factored into our final report coming from this inquiry. I'd like to thank you all for being with us. Dr. Peter Smith, Chief Education Officer, with the Education Ministry, Mr. Anand Ramnarayan, CEO of MIC, Dr. Patrice Paris-Salis, CEO of NTA, Mr. Irvin Huggins, Director of Funding and Grants, Administration Division, Mrs. Ava Billy Jackman, Manager Research YTEP, Mr. Peter Fraser, Curriculum Coordinator TVET, and also from the Ministry of Youth Development and National Service, Mr. Farouk Hussain, PS, Mr. Major David Benjamin, Director Specialized Youth Service, Program SYSP, Mr. Sean Ramratan, Director Youth Affairs Division, and Ms. Janine Benjamin, Project Monitoring Coordinator, Project Management Unit, and of course the members of this committee, MP Roger Monroe, Member Monroe, Member Mohit, Member Stinanen, and Member Nakid. We'd also like to thank the Secretariat for their usual yeoman service, and also you, members of the viewing and listening public, for being with us today and your attention. At this time, it's my honor to be able to thank you all for viewing and close this, adjourn this session. Until next time, thank you all and have a great, safe day.
Thank you.
Thank you, and same to you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.